Good morning. How's everyone doing? Good. I'm very happy to be here. My wife and I have been traveling the world for the last 22 years. We live full-time on the road most of the time. We do have a house up in Michigan in a very cold place. We just spent a month down in Brazil, and Brazil is a great place to spend this time of year because it's summer down there. It just turned fall, and the weather was incredible, being in both a tropical and a subtropical area. We loved it there. And we share seminars on various different things. Like he said, we have a documentary film company called Anchor Point Films where we go around to archaeologists, historians, theologians, scholars, medical professionals, and make documentaries about health, science, the scriptures, Bible prophecy, history, these kind of things. And we also have a YouTube channel called Health and Homestead where we interact with people on research on those two things. On health, we look at scientific studies that have been compared in the scientific literature, in the peer-reviewed journals, looking at things like natural remedies that have been compared head-to-head, often with pharmaceutical treatments, and often we share the research on studies that have looked at the natural remedies that have been found to be just as good or better, typically with significantly less side effects than you would find in the standard drug medication. And we also talk about country living, homesteading, and these kinds of things on the channel. And we are actually, it's kind of a secret, but I guess it won't be now, but we're planning to sell and to move and to start a health center. One of my favorite things in life, Jesus sent his disciples to do two things on planet Earth. It says in Luke chapter 9, verse 2, and he, speaking of Jesus, sent them, speaking of the disciples, he sent them to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. Those are the two things that Jesus sent his disciples forth to do. And I did evangelism for a number of years. I still do, actually. So I do typically 1 or 2 meetings a year. But I used to do full-time evangelism, and I would do the gospel work, the three angels' messages, and I still do that because we need to share the messages of the three angels with every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. But right along with that, in the third angel's message, is the health message. And I didn't do much of that in the beginning because, to be honest with you, I didn't like the health message. I didn't really enjoy that until I began to have health issues. I had gallbladder problems, I had migraines, I had achy joints, I had depression. I went through this for about 10, 11 years. And then a little old statement from those what used to be little red books. When I heard something, I tried it, and within 2 weeks, my depression went away. My migraines ended up from the change of lifestyle. My migraines went away. The achy joints went away. I became so much healthier. I was 35 at that time when the change was made, and I felt better at 35 than I did when I was maybe 16 or 18 years old. It changed my life. And so after it changed my life, over time, I wasn't embarrassed about the health message anymore. I wanted to share it with others because it changed my life. And so that's why we have a desire to start a health center, and actually we don't even know where that's going to be yet. We're praying that the Lord will direct us just to the right place. There may be something opening up soon. We'll see, the Lord knows, but we will go at this point. Ever since I became an Adventist, I said to God, I will go wherever you would want me to go. And he's sent us on the road for the last 22 years, and until he comes, I just want to do whatever Jesus leads in my life. And so that's a little bit about me, but I want to begin our message on the gut-brain connection. Before I start on that, you don't get to go to heaven because you stop eating something. Yes or no? Now, my favorite food before becoming an Adventist was pork ribs, actually, specifically. And you don't get to go to heaven by not eating something. Dead bodies don't eat anything. And they don't get to go to heaven because of that. Yes or no? We are saved by grace through faith, and that not of ourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should what? boast. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. And so we are saved by grace through faith. Now, for instance, let's just say you lived in the state of Texas. They have the death penalty. And let's say you lived in the state of Texas and you had murdered 50 children and you got caught. And you acknowledged you murdered 50 children, no question. Now, what would they do to you in the state of Texas? Yeah, they would give you the death penalty. No question. No question. Now, let's say you're waiting on death row, and that takes years and years. I mean, probably a minimum of like 10 or 20 years to die. But, so you're on death row, you're waiting, you know, you're already convicted. And then while you're on death row, you're doing a lot of good deeds, all kinds of good deeds. How many good deeds would you have to do while on death row to be let off of death row? How many? Would 10,000 be enough? How about 100,000? 1,000,000? There are no amount of good deeds that can get you off the death sentence or death row. Does that make sense? Right? And we are, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death. So there's a death sentence. How many of us have committed sin? All of us. So if we stopped sinning, let's say we stopped sinning from here until Jesus came back, would we deserve to go to heaven? Yes or no? Why not? Because there's a death sentence passed, meaning at least we've been convicted of sin. So if we're going to be saved, we can only be saved by grace through faith, and that not of ourselves. This is righteousness by faith. Does this make sense? So when we talk about health, we're not saying you get to be saved by eating right. That's impossible. But could it be that God has given us this message to give us a better life in the process of being saved? I'll give you an example. I love this quotation from Counsels on Health. We were told this. We were told in teaching health principles, keep before the mind the great object of reform or health reform. Well, what is it? That its purpose is to secure the highest development of body and mind and soul. Show that the laws of nature, being the laws of God, are designed for our what? Good. That obedience to them will promote what? Happiness in this life and aids us in a preparation for the life to come. One of the reasons we were given the health message was to make us happy. Isn't that interesting? One of the reasons, when I was depressed, when I went through the 11 years of depression, I was still preaching the gospel. People were giving their life to Jesus. They were coming to Him. They were being baptized. They were walking with the Lord, and that brought some joy to my heart, and I was yet depressed every day. And I felt lost for those 11 years. I was seeking to make my life right with God. I was confessing my sins. I was having devotions every single day of the week, and yet I was absolutely depressed, felt lost. And so this is what I was struggling with. And I even thought during it, I was like, well, what if I am lost and I'm sharing the gospel with everybody else? And what if I don't make it to heaven? But then I thought, what if I am lost? But what if other people do get to go to heaven because of what I share? Well, then I'll just keep doing it. And I spent thousands of dollars to try to right the wrongs of my past, but no peace came to my soul. It was absolutely horrendous. And even just yesterday while we were driving here, I thought back on those years of utter depression, and I got chills. I was like, wow, that was crazy. That was really tough. But at the worst moment of my depression, the thought came to me, what if you have to live with this for the rest of your life? And the very next thought that came to my mind was, then I just accept it. It is what it is. I know that Jesus is the answer even though I don't feel connected to Him, even though I'm seeking Him every single day. I just kept going forward. And it was finally a statement from the Spirit of prophecy that I tried what she said, boom, within 2 weeks all my depression went away. And I am so thankful that the Lord helped me not to give up during those years. By no means was I perfect during those years, not at all. I don't want to make it sound like that. But I can say this, I'm so thankful that I didn't give up. Because I could see many people thinking like, if this is how you feel, why would I live for God? This is horrible. But I knew Jesus was the answer. I knew Jesus was the answer, even though I couldn't experience it for over a decade. But I'm actually thankful today that I went through those sufferings. But one of the reasons God gave us the health message is that obedience to the laws that he's given us will promote our happiness in this life. One of the reasons was to make us happy. Now, we're going to talk about the gut-brain connection. Now, the oldest study, medical historians have went back and looked through history to find the oldest scientific study in recorded history. This is from the scientific journal Perspectives in Clinical Research. The title of the article is Evolution of Clinical Research, A History Before and Beyond by James Lind. Listen to what they say is the oldest scientific study in all of recorded history. It says in the article, the world's first clinical trial is recorded in the book of Daniel in the Bible. The Bible actually has the first scientific study in all of recorded history. Now, you probably already know about that study in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel's taken from Jerusalem, his home city, taken to Babylon. Think about this. We are going to repeat Babylon. We live in modern-day Babylon. Is it going to happen that kids will be taken from their parents again? I think it could happen. I don't know. I'm not saying exactly how it's going to happen, but I wouldn't doubt it, especially if you don't believe the right ideology of the system. I believe that could happen again. Does that sound crazy? Or does that sound like something that you could almost see happening today? You could almost see that happening, right? If you don't go along with what's being taught in the popular ideas in society. But nevertheless, Daniel was taken captive, taken to Jerusalem. As he was there, put through a 3-year educational system. They were given the best food, the best things that you could eat. Obviously, that would be meat, all the high-protein food. And yet, what happened? Daniel 1 verse 8 says, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore, he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not, what? Defile himself. So he said, I don't want to do this. I don't know, is that clean, unclean? Is it common? And long story short, it goes on. Here's the test. Here's the study. Test your servants for 10 days and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Now, pulse are things that are grown from seeds. What happened at the end of that? You already know this. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all of his realm. Fascinating. So this actually, what Daniel was eating, evidently seemed to, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, seemed to impact their cognition. The first scientific study in all of recorded history evidently is a study of the gut-brain connection. Very interesting. I'm going to show you a video clip right now if we're able to get the audio for that. Here's a video clip from a documentary that my wife and I produced called Ancient Health. We showed a clip from it last night. We'll see if this one works.
But the main thing that folks should be concerned about is how long you live and how likely you are to get disease. And there have been 3 major studies published on this subject, big meta-analyses. And these meta-analyses, and only 3 big ones have been published, they show consistently that low-carb diets, in other words, low plant food diets, high animal food diets, consistently they show that they're associated with more heart disease and more death, more mortality.
If you look around the world and you look at these people in the blue zones, the average percentage of calories from carbs ranges from about 50% to about 80%. Carbs are not the enemy, refined carbs are the enemy.
There have been a number of recent studies. Dr. Beeshold out of Phoenix, Arizona, first she did an observational study showing that plant-based diet actually significantly improves your depression and anxiety stress score. It's called a DASS score.
So the mood actually is improved when you get the right amount of carbohydrates, but also the right type of carbohydrates and less protein.
Then she followed up with an interventional study, and that's where she took people who are not on a plant-based diet and put them on a plant-based diet for 2 weeks. She also put them on a plant-based diet plus fish for 2 weeks to see which one would be superior. And it turned out the fish diet wasn't any more superior than the carnivore diet. But the plant-based diet, significant, dramatic changes, statistically significant changes in just 2 weeks in their mental ability.
We see when people go on this diet and drink plenty of water, get plenty of rest, follow these natural remedies that it's just like something snaps in their brain, and it doesn't take like weeks or months.
Plant-based diet is key in our program for depression and anxiety recovery. The results are outstanding because it's a comprehensive approach. It's not just diet. We also utilize exercise, and we're utilizing correct thoughts and a lot of different modalities. But the diet is a key element.
I went on a plant-based diet about 5 weeks ago.
It's amazing because even if they had not told me he had the diet change, the first thing I noticed was he was bringing his schoolwork in.
And my teacher has actually been bragging on how much better I've been behaving since I've been on the diet.
In class, he wasn't getting as distracted, that he was paying attention, he was able to listen more closely, he was being alert, his discernment was better, he was more diligent, everything.
I can pay attention more. My mind is more clear since I've been on the diet.
It's just a huge improvement. And I also noticed he lost a lot of weight. But the main things I noticed was behavioral.
A study in a middle school has showed clearly that switching the menu from animal source to plant source diet almost eliminated absenteeism, increased and enhanced attention and homework performance and performance at school. It almost eliminated acts of violence as well as teen pregnancies.
And so they just feel better. Everywhere the blood flows, everywhere that perfect circulation goes, they feel better. Not just in body, but in mind. Clears up their thoughts even.
And every single day since I've been on a plant-based diet, the clarity continues to increase, and my face continues to look younger, and my body feels like I look more vibrant. I've looked at pictures of myself before and after, and I look 5 years older, even just 10 months ago, than I do now.
What we eat does get turned into neurotransmitters. It actually helps us or hurts us, depending on what we're eating in regards to our brain chemistry. And it plays a vital role in health of the brain.
They'll say within 3 or 4 days, they seem to have clarity. They're alert. They listen in class better. They absorb more, and they do better on their tests.
The fog has been lifted out of my head. I think clearer. I've got better ideas, I believe. I can put 2 and 2 together faster, and just in general, I'm happier.
In fact, diet alone, studies show that diet alone will reduce your depression and anxiety scores by half, just by dramatically changing your diet to a plant-based. And so that's significant. Now, we go for more than just half, and so that's why we have a whole program that includes more than this. But just the diet alone will make a big difference.
You don't have to choose between high quality living and longevity. It's the same program. The same New Start approach to living helps you live longer, and it helps you live better.
It's quite interesting, isn't it? That changing diets of people today can actually change their cognition today, just like it could 2,500 years ago in the book of Daniel. Very fascinating. Now, this is the gut-brain connection, and the Bible actually talks about this repeatedly. Looking back in Lamentations chapter 1, verse 20, "Behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are," what? "Troubled." They seem to notice this connection between the gut, the bowels, and what was going on in their mind. We see also in Jeremiah chapter 4, verse 19, my bowels, I am pained at my very heart." Very interesting, noticing this connection. Now, we talked last night about how we have this nerve that connects our brain to our gut called the vagus nerve, and that 90% of the information that travels in that nerve actually goes from the gut to the brain, not the other way around. And this is one of the reasons researchers are now calling the gut the second brain, their second brain. We also saw research that shows that the gut may have to do with our memory also, fascinatingly enough. Now, I'm going to read to you a quotation that a few years ago would have sounded like quackery and just something you would just laugh at. We were told in the book Counsels in Diet and Foods that the abuses of the stomach by the gratification of appetite are a fruitful source of most church trials. That was the kind of thing where you're like, I wish he didn't say that. That sounds crazy, right? And now we're seeing, now you're going to see with the research we look at, this is cutting edge what she said. It sounded so outlandish because we were so behind the times scientifically, not that she was off. It was actually absolutely accurate. Scientists have discovered that a high-fat diet leads to depressive, anxious symptoms in mice. It also promotes inflammation. Mostly, we're not going to look at animal studies, but this is an interesting one. They did a study on rodents. They put them on 2 different diets, one on a high-fat diet. The other group they put on a standard fat diet. And they discovered that the ones on the high-fat diet began to exhibit multiple different negative psychological and physiological characteristics. For example, they noticed that the ones on the high-fat diet began to exhibit inflammation in their body, which is a marker for many lifestyle diseases. They began to have repetitive behaviors, things like memory problems. Now, repetitive behaviors in human example, when people have repetitive behaviors, that can be things like OCD or depression, where you continually repeat over and over and over the same negative things. Well, they then went to the ones who had the high-fat diet, and they took bacteria out of their intestines. Now, the ones on the standard fat diet didn't have the psychological problems or physiological problems. But when they took the bacteria from the high-fat diet group and put it in the standard fat diet group, the standard fat diet group began to exhibit anxiety, impaired memory, repetitive behaviors, and inflammation. The same problems that took place in the mice on the high-fat diet took place in the standard fat diet when they were given the same bacteria. Could it be that something in our gut is impacting our cognition and our physiological health? Very interesting. Listen to what she says in the book Child Guidance. Eating too frequently, too much, and of rich, unwholesome food. Now, there's 2 ways to make food rich. One of them is making a meal high in what? Fat, that's one. And the other way would be to make it high in sugar. Those are the 2 ways to make meals rich, right? She says eating too frequently, too much of rich, unwholesome food destroys the healthy action of the digestive organs, affects the brain, and perverts the judgment, preventing rational, calm, healthy thinking and acting. She also says, it cannot be too often repeated that whatever is taken into the stomach not only affects the body, but ultimately the mind as well. It is difficult and often well nigh impossible for one who is intemperate in diet to exercise patience and self-control. Now, it's interesting because this concept she shares actually comes from the Bible. The Bible says in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 5, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge what? Temperance. But what comes after temperance in this ladder? And to temperance, patience. Notice she says, it is well nigh impossible for one who is intemperate to exercise patience. Very, very interesting. Now, this is a biblical concept, actually, and I want to look at some of the potential physiology of this. Now, to start off looking at digestion, you probably heard it said that when you eat a meal, if it has plant food, whole plant food in it, it has fiber, but we cannot digest fiber. Now, that is true, but there is something in our body that actually can digest fiber. And what is that? It's the bacteria. There's good bacteria in our guts that is able to digest the fiber that we consume, and as the bacteria digest that fiber, it metabolizes it, and it gives off a byproduct called short-chain fatty acids, which in turn have the benefit to us of lowering inflammation in our bodies. And by the way, often depression can be an inflammatory problem. That it may be that the inflammation in our body may be increasing levels of depression. So one of the things we can do beneficially to our bodies and beneficial to many of the lifestyle diseases is lowering inflammation. One of the ways to do that is by eating fiber. Now, where does fiber come from? It comes from plants. There is no fiber in animal food. It's actually a part of the structure of plants. And so as you eat a diversity of plants, you get a diversity of kinds of fiber that can be beneficial to you. Now, this is from Scientific American, an article called Think Twice, How the Gut's Second Brain Influences Mood and Well-Being. Now, I don't know if you'll be able to read it. It's kind of small, but this is quite fascinating. It says the second brain informs our state of mind in other more obscure ways as well. A big part of our emotions are probably influenced by the nerves in our gut. You've heard of butterflies in the stomach. That's an example about our physiological stress response. And then they go on to say, although gastrointestinal or gut turmoil can sour one's moods, everyday emotional well-being may rely on the messages from the brain below to the brain above. So they say that gut turmoil can sour your moods. Now that's interesting. Listen to what we were told in Counsels on Diet and Health. Listen to the wording here. It says, people who have a sour stomach are very often of a sour disposition. Doesn't that sound like the researchers today are like copying her writings? They're plagiarizing her. No, they're not plagiarizing her. They probably don't even know who she is. But yet it's almost like they took what she said and like kind of twisted the words around a little bit and threw it in the Scientific American. People who have a sour stomach are very often of a sour disposition. Everything seems to be contrary to them, and they are inclined to be peevish and irritable. If we would have peace among ourselves, we should give more thought than we do to having a peaceful what? Stomach. And is this what the researchers are telling us today? Yes, and like I said, 20, 30 years ago, you'd be like, yeah, I wish she wouldn't have said that. But now you're like, wow, this is amazing what she said, right? Now, here's the thing. Now, she says that if you have this issue in your gut, you can be inclined to have peevishness. Is that a word we use very often today? No. Have you told your children, why are you being so peevish? Probably not. The word actually means, fascinatingly enough, it means easily irritated, especially by unimportant things. Have you ever been peevish before? Have you ever seen somebody being peevish, yes or no? Probably all of us. I've been peevish, I can tell you, but you've probably also seen other people be peevish, or you get easily annoyed by something. Could it actually be from something going on down here rather than what's specifically going on right here, although this may be impacting this? And researchers, Claudia mentioned it last night, but researchers have found that 2/3, maybe even 70% of your immune system is found in your gut. So this is a very important part of our bodies. And this is a fascinating study, a surprising link between gut germs and toddlers' tantrums. They looked at toddlers and they analyzed the bacteria, what's called the microbiome, in the intestines of these toddlers. And what they discovered was that those who had a good diversity of bacteria in their gut were more social, were happier, were more positive, and more outgoing. And the converse was also true, that those who had less diversity of bacteria were more antisocial and had more tantrums. Interesting. Could it be that if we want more peace among ourselves, we should give more thought than we do to having a peaceful stomach, like she told us? So the question is, if you want a good ratio of gut bacteria, what might you want to do? This next article is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, headed out by Dr. Neil Barnard. Many of you probably know who that is, especially medical doctors in the plant-based world would know about Dr. Neil Barnard, who's worked with the United States government, done research on reversing type 2 diabetes and so forth. But this article, it says, the title of it is, Vegan Diets Lead to Healthier Intestinal Bacteria. Now the question is, why might that be? Well, there's a couple reasons, actually. Number one, researchers have discovered, you take something as simple as an apple has about 100 million bacteria in and on that apple. Now, you might be thinking, then I will never eat an apple again. But in actuality, in general, these bacteria are good for you. But if you only eat apples, then you only get the good bacteria from the apples. But if you add to your diet things like pears, you can get a different microbial diversity. If you add to your diet grapes, strangely enough, have a very distinct and different group of bacteria. So you add those to your diet, you're adding to that microbial, that bacterial pool in your gut. and the greater diversity you're adding to that pool. Now, that's one reason. The second reason is because fruit and veggies also have fiber. So you're also giving them the food that the bacteria need. So as you give them that food, they can remain healthy within your intestines. Now, this makes perfect sense that this could be beneficial to your health and happiness if you look at the world from a biblical point of view. Because the Bible says back in Genesis chapter 1, verse 29, and God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in the which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for food." Or King James says it shall be for meat, right? And very interesting looking at that the food God gave Adam and Eve, now where did they live? What was it called? The Garden of Eden. What was the word Eden in the Hebrew language? Means pleasure. The Garden of Pleasure. So you would figure, if you had a biblical mind frame, you would figure that whatever God gave Adam and Eve in the Garden of Pleasure would be the best for bringing us pleasure, health, and happiness. Do you follow? And that is what we are discovering. Actually, they've already done research on Adventists, because Adventists, they break them down into the various diets that we have, and they have found that the ones who are on a plant-based diet happen to be the happiest Seventh-day Adventists. Now, God isn't forcing anybody to be healthy nor happy. He lays the framework, tells us how to do it, and says, "Come unto me, all ye who desire. Taste and see that the Lord is good," but you'll only find out if you taste and see. But he will never force you, because God is a gentleman. God gives everyone freedom of choice. That's one of the things I love about God, and it's also one of the most difficult things, because in some ways you wish he just forced us to do the right things, but if he did that, there would be no love. Because you can't have love by force, right? You can't force somebody at a gunpoint to love you. So in actuality, no, I'm glad that God gave us freedom. And we're living in a time where we're slowly seeing our freedoms taken away from us, but that's a little off subject. But this is a review in a scientific journal called the Bulgarian Journal of Plant Physiology. And the title of this review is that animal neurotransmitter substances are found in plants. What does that mean? Now, neurotransmitters are neuro or brain chemicals that we have in our brain, but researchers are discovering that the neurochemicals are actually found in plants. That's quite interesting. Now, we're going to look at a study, and before we do, I think you can already guess the result of this study. They looked at research on alcoholism and lacking gut bacteria. It was a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States of America, and it revealed an imbalance of gut bacteria in certain alcoholics. They had 60 alcoholics, and 24 out of the 60 had lower levels of bacteria in their gut. Now, so some of the majority of them had a little more diversity or a little more bacteria. The other ones didn't have as much. Now, the group that didn't have as much, the 24 that didn't have as much, do you think those ones found it easier or more difficult to overcome the alcohol? What would you guess? More difficult. That's what you guessed. Well, let's see what the researchers found. After 19 days alcohol-free, those with lower levels of bacteria had higher levels of anxious feeling, depression, and desire for alcohol. And the 36 participants with better gut flora did better. Very interesting. Could it be that one of the things that's making people prone to addiction is lack of bacteria within their intestines? Could it be that the majority of the problems in our church come from what we put in our mouth goes into the stomach, but once it goes to the stomach, where does it ultimately go? Into the gut, into the intestines, right? She was right once again. We see there's research coming out on fruit and vegetables may help to combat drug addiction. I was sharing this research with a friend of mine who was and we got to call him, I forgot to call him back, but a friend of ours who was a meth addict for years. And this man, we would visit him from time to time, try to encourage him and so forth. And as I shared with him the research and these things we've been looking at here, he said something fascinating to me. He said, all drug addicts have one thing in common. So I'm wondering, What is it? And he said, they all have terrible diets. Do you typically see like a heroin addict who's like, man, I could go for a salad? Very unlikely. What are they eating? They're eating junk food most of the time, which the junk food, even if it's vegan, by the way, probably most of the junk food out there is vegan. Not all of it. Now they throw a bunch of like cheese dust on it. but at least either vegetarian or vegan. Yes or no? But that doesn't necessarily make it healthy. We want to get closer to the way that God designed the food, right? So if God knew that changing people's diets could help them overcome addiction, wouldn't that have been helpful if he would have just told us about that? That would have been really helpful to us. Well, guess what? He did. Notice what we were told in Counsels on Diet and Foods. In our medical institutions, clear instructions should be given in regard to temperance. The patient should be shown the evil of intoxicating liquor and the blessing of total abstinence. They should be asked to discard the things that have ruined their health, and the place of these things, or in place of these things, should be supplied with an abundance of fruit. Oranges, lemons, prunes, peaches, and many other varieties that can be obtained, for the Lord's world is productive if painstaking effort is put forth. How did a lady with a third grade education get all of this science accurate before the researchers themselves knew? How could she have done this? Because it's not the testimony of Ellen White, it is the testimony of Jesus, which is the spirit of prophecy. This was a message that God, Jesus, blessed the world with in the last days, partly because we are so corrupted physically today. And that these messages could help transform body, mind, and soul, as she said, but also would promote our happiness in this life, but would aid us in a preparation for the life to come. Researchers out of the University of Queensland in Australia have found that fruit is a depression buster for women. More fruit, less depression. They have found, this is actually quite interesting, this is from the Journal of Neuropsychiatry of Clinical Neuroscience. This entry here is depression and fruit treatment. And they say depression is a common mood disorder affecting sleep, appetite, and libido, and is also one of the manifestations of dementia and may lead to suicide attempts, particularly with violent methods. Research has shown that involvement of serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan in depression. These are these neurotransmitters, these neurochemicals. And they go on to say there are some high-content sources of serotonin, melatonin, and tryptophan which can provide the body with these substances. What is it? These include plantains, pineapples, bananas, kiwis, and plums, and tomatoes for serotonin. And what they are saying is these neurochemicals can actually be found in food. And actually, we actually need, strangely enough, many of these neurotransmitters actually in our gut, they've found. They are in this area of the intestines with all these nerve endings. And looking at this, and they go on to conclude, it seems that using such foods in the daily diet of depressed patients could not only treat the disease, but may improve the prognosis of dementia and decrease violent suicide attempts. Wow, fascinating. This is quite an interesting study. This is the name the scientists actually themselves gave to the study. Many apples a day keep the blues away. Now, you're thinking, many apples, so I got to eat a bunch of apples every day? No, they were doing a play on an apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? But what did they find? What they found is that those who ate more fruits and veggies on a daily basis, actually for each one they ate, it actually increased their level of life satisfaction or happiness. But they also discovered that how many servings of fruits or vegetables you ate today would forecast how happy you would be tomorrow. So it was causative, evidently. They repeated the study. This is from the American Journal of Public Health right here. Last one from the British Journal of Health Psychology. This is from the American Journal of Public Health. This is how happy you are on the left, change in life satisfaction, how many servings of fruits or vegetables in a day. If you eat 0, you're statistically at your lowest level of happiness. You eat 1, it's probably even hardly makes a difference, but then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 servings of fruits or vegetables, and you become significantly happier as a result, and it forecasts how happy you'll be the next day. Fascinating. Remember, we were given the health message in part to make us happy. Well, researchers have looked, okay, what's the best microbial bacterial makeup in the gut? Well, the University of California, San Diego reports on the largest human study on the microbiome, the bacteria within the gut. And it turns out that people who consume more than 30 different plants every week have the greatest diversity of bacteria in their guts compared with those who have 10 different plants a week. Now, you might think, man, that's really hard. It's actually really not, well, depending on what you're eating. You ever buy those like boxes of like pre-washed, like organic greens in a box from like, I don't know if you have you got Costco a ways away from here, but you can buy them anywhere. But you have these boxes. Sometimes they'll have like 13 different greens in one box. So you're almost halfway through in one meal the diversity for a week. It's really not actually that hard. And you may have 3 or 4 different fruits with breakfast. So the point is, it's not really that hard to reach that level if you're eating a whole food, non-refined, plant-based diet. This right here is from the British Journal of Nutrition, the Dietary Phytochemical Index. Phytochemical, the word phyto means plant. So these are the plant chemical index, and these are people who had the most unrefined plant foods in their diets, had 78% lower depression. They had 67% lower anxiety. They had 70% lower levels of psychological distress. And what they found is that those who had the lowest levels of depression, anxiety, and psychological distress ate the most fruit, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, zinc, potassium, magnesium, vitamin C, vitamin E, vitamin A, fiber, and what was the last one there? Carbs. I thought carbs were a curse word. I thought, you'd almost think if you listen to media today that Satan himself created carbohydrates. But does the Bible teach that? No, that's not what the Bible teaches. Don't eat fruit, right? Fruit, you go online and it says if you want to avoid belly fat, avoid this one thing. And what do they show a picture of? It's like a banana. A banana, right? Like the reason Americans are struggling with their weight these days, it's too many bananas, folks. That's what's going on in America today, right? And this epidemic is spreading across the planet. Too many bananas, right? Not at all, right? Not at all. Actually, there's people who eat 30, I'm not exaggerating, there's a website, 30 bananas a day, where people eat 30 bananas a day. They're fruitarians. I'm not telling you to become a fruitarian. That's not my point here. But they're fruitarians. They eat 80% fruit, 20% veggies. They're the skinniest people in society. The idea that bananas make you fat is laughable. It is ridiculous, right? There's no evidence to back that up. So if we want to be happier, now, one of the things that historically and even scientifically they may use the term today, we don't normally use it today, but it's called dyspepsia. It's where you have gut issues, and the actual definition means where you have intestinal problems and consequent irritability or depression. It's actually the definition of dyspepsia. And listen to what we were told in Counsels on Diet and Foods. For a dyspeptic stomach, you may place upon your tables fruit of different kinds, but not too many at one meal. Now, she says that about anything. Don't eat too much of anything. Although she does say when it comes to fruits, grains, and vegetables, eat them freely. There are certain things she says to be cautious with. She says we should eat nuts. Anybody know? Sparingly. Nuts are good for you, sure. But we are to eat them sparingly. I ran into a guy who he was trying to eat healthy, and he had intestinal trouble all the time. And so he's eating all these nuts and all this oil and all these fatty things, and he kept having gut trouble. And then he talked to me, and he finally went on a carnivore diet, just meat, and all his intestinal troubles went away. Common experience, actually. It's very popular on the internet. People with a lot of intestinal troubles go on a full carnivore diet, just meat, nothing else. All their intestinal trouble goes away, except constipation. They get constipation because they have no fiber in their diet. But otherwise, they don't have intestinal discomfort. So I said to him, well, what are you eating? He was eating a bunch of greens. He was eating, the oil. He was eating a bunch of nuts. And I said, listen, one of the most difficult things for many people to eat is nuts and, strangely enough, oil. I said, when you go back, eat some simple foods, begin to add things back, and avoid the nuts for a while. He went back, he contacted me, a week or two, probably a couple weeks later, and he's like, it's working. It's making a difference. Because people are thinking, well, I got to get the fat, I got to get the protein, I got to get the fat. But these things are they're more concentrated. It's not a sin. They're actually good to have some. But the reality is there is a balance to many of these things. Now, that's for people in very extreme cases. I'm not talking about for everybody. But she tells us it would be well for us to do less cooking and eat more fruit in its natural state. Let us eat freely of fresh grapes, apples, peaches, oranges, blackberries, and all other kinds of fruit which can be obtained. Now, this goes back to the Garden of Eden. If fruit was bad for us, wouldn't that be kind of make the Bible a bit questionable? And it's simply not true. Now, don't get me wrong, there are a few people who maybe struggle with melons, or my poor wife is allergic to mangoes. I always say that to get everybody to pity my poor wife, you know? And I feel bad for her too, because we were just down in Brazil, and I bought like 37 mangoes at one time, and I'm not exaggerating, actually. And I bought, persimmons? I bought like 48 persimmons or 50 of them for like $5, like 10 cents a piece. I was eating in one day 14 persimmons, because they're just so good. Now you think this guy's crazy. Yeah, I'm a little bit extreme sometimes, but they were just so good, and I was in a tropical place, and I enjoyed it. But the point is, God has given us these things, and you're thinking, if carbs make you fat, I'm probably the heaviest person in the world. I eat ridiculous levels of carbs, and I feel absolutely phenomenal in my 40s, because I actually believe God was right. And so you think, oh, this guy's promoting carbs. Listen, no, I'm not saying, so you're thinking, you're promoting candy bars. You're promoting cotton candy. No, right? We're not talking about refined junk food. We're talking about the food God made for us, right? Now, I want to share with you why I share this. I went through, like I said, 10 years of depression, 11 years of depression. We had lived overseas, got stomach trouble. As a result of it, ended up getting depression. I tried all kinds of things I'd hear, doctor, try this supplement, try this. I never tried the medications, because and if you do that, I'm not putting anybody down. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to figure out the actual cause of my problem. And so finally, I heard a quotation by Ellen White. I tried it, and boom, it worked. Because I had had stomach trouble for years. Because of the stomach trouble, I had lost like 30 pounds, got very, very skinny. I'm quite skinny now, but I put on weight since that time. And, my wife lost a bunch of weight, another guy. We all had stomach trouble and lost weight because of it. But I heard a specific quotation. I'm going to show you a similar one in just a moment. And I followed that, and it changed my life. But before I share that, so many of those years, though, I had probably seasonal depression, where in the winter I would be really depressed, and then not as depressed in the summer, but probably somewhat depressed still. But then what happened is, after 8 or 9 years of it, I was down either here in Tennessee or Missouri or something. I was looking at land, and I got a tick bite, and a doctor friend said, "Here, I'll give you some antibiotics so you can take those and make sure you don't get Lyme disease." Okay, took them, and then I just went into full-blown year-round depression. Now, I didn't make the connection until later when I looked into the research. For every round of antibiotics you take, it increases your chances of depression by about 25%. For every 2 to 5 rounds of antibiotics that you take, it increases your risk of depression for roughly about 50%. And so the question is, why? Well, you can probably guess, now that you've heard all the research, what are you killing when you use antibiotics? Bacteria. And those with less bacteria have more potential mental health struggles. I mean, this makes perfect sense physiologically, right? And so then the next year I got bit again, took antibiotics again, and 2 years in a row, it was like chronic 100% of the time, the worst depression I had ever had. And but didn't make the connection until I began to study, look into the research, and looking into all of this. So then you think, okay, so what do? Okay, you're saying probably right after you take the antibiotics, you should go take a pill filled with bacteria. What do we call those pills? Probiotics. Well, let's see what the research shows. They've actually done research on this here in the journal Cell, and this is post-antibiotic gut mucosal microbiome reconstruction is impaired by probiotics. Now, what is this talking about? And improved by autologous FMT, or fecal microbiome transplant. I'm not telling you need to go take an FMT, but what is that? That's where you take feces out of somebody and you put it back either into somebody else or you put it back into yourself. That's called a fecal microbiome transplant. Now, this is what they did in the study. They divided the people into 3 different groups. They put one group of people, they took antibiotics, and they did nothing else to change. So they were, They just simply did nothing. The second group did, after they took the antibiotics, they took these probiotics to try to to put bacteria back into the gut and then to recolonize the gut. The third group, they actually, before they went in for the antibiotics, they took some of their own stool and they ended up putting it back into these people after they were done with the antibiotics. Now, what ended up happening? Those who did the fecal microbiome transplant, and I'm not here to promote this, I'm just telling you what the study showed. The people, you can do it one of two ways. One of the ways, they can put your feces in pills and you can swallow it. That's one way. The other way they do it is they put it back up in the other end. That's another way of doing it. Now, which one sounds better? You get to make your own decision. I don't know. Sorry, not supposed to be talking about this at church. This is not my point. But here's the thing. So then, this is what they did in the three groups. The group that did the FMT, the fecal microbiome transplant, they ended up getting their microbiome back to normal in 2 days. The group that did the second best was the group that did nothing. The group that did the absolute worst was those who took probiotics. It took them 6 months to get their bacteria back to normal. That's interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that, but that is what the research shows. So the question is, what might be a good way to begin to recolonize the gut with the good bacteria? Well, where did Adam and Eve get the good bacteria? Was there like a pharmacy with some, little pills for Adam and Eve? Now, they didn't need to recolonize them, obviously. They were in a perfect environment. But where do they come from naturally? The fruits, the vegetables, the plants God has given us. Eating a diversity of things is going to recolonate the gut with the things that you need for your health and happiness. Now, this is similar to the quote that changed my life. Ellen White says, in many cases of sickness, the very best remedy is for the patient to fast for a meal or two, that the overworked organs of digestion may have an opportunity to rest. A fruit diet for a few days has often brought great relief to brain workers. I went on a temporary fruit diet. Temporary. Then she says, many times a short period of entire abstinence from food, followed by simple, moderate eating, has led to recovery through nature's own recuperative effort. An abstemious or a simple diet for a month or two would convince many sufferers that the path of self-denial is the path to hell. So what did she say? She said, temporarily go on a fast. She says, skip 1 or 2 meals, one time, not forever, just one time. Now, if you're used to eating, she suggests eating, for most people, 2 meals is great. For some people, they may work really hard and 3 works just fine for them. So she says one time you skip 1 or 2 meals. So if you're normally eating 3 meals a day and you skip 2, you would fast one time for roughly 24 hours, 23 hours or so. If you're used to eating 2 meals a day and you skipped 1 meal, you would fast roughly for about 23 hours. So about a 24-hour fast. So she says begin by doing that. And then, not every day, you don't need to go 24 hours every, just one time, she says to let the organs of digestion rest. And then she says more whole fruits. She actually says to go on a fruit diet temporarily, not forever. And I did that, and within I didn't read the quote about, she said a few days. She didn't say how long, so I didn't know. In the quote I saw, I didn't know how long, so I did it for 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, the depression just went away. It was incredible. Now, I always exercised. I would either run or bicycle or lift weights or do push-ups or do pull-ups, I've always loved exercise, so I've always been doing that. I would get out in the sun. I would do all kinds of healthy things, but as I tried this, my depression went away. And I don't mean this is the one thing that gets rid of depression for everybody. I don't believe that. There's other factors. We're going to talk about that this afternoon. Even if you're not depressed, you could be maybe 10, 20% happier. By doing the principles we've been given, you could still be a happier person. And you may be able to help somebody else. So if you think, I'm not going to come because if I come, they're going to think I'm depressed. Well, no, we're not. There's no way everybody that's going to come is depressed, but don't come because you're embarrassed that somebody might think you're depressed. Because guess what? You would need it the most. And I needed it the most. I was embarrassed to tell anybody I was depressed, but I'm not anymore because I don't care. I've been through that. I'm happy now that I actually went through that. But so go on a temporary fruit diet, she says. Someone says, Chad, but don't you know that could be bad for diabetics. It might make you a diabetic. Well, this is a research from the British Medical Journal, over 100,000 people, looking at fruits and their chances of increasing or decreasing your chance of diabetes. The line here, it can be about 50% of the people, it may actually increase it. Another half, it doesn't make a difference. So that one's kind of a wash for cantaloupe. Melons sometimes can cause blood sugar spikes, though, for people. But strawberries, for the vast majority of people, lower their chances of diabetes. Anything under the line is lowering it. And oranges lower it more. Peaches, plums, apricots more. Grapefruit more. Bananas more. Apples and pears more. Prunes lower it more than fresh plums. That's interesting. Who would ever think that dried fruit could be beneficial for your health? Well, you know what LOI says? She says we can eat more dried fruit than is customary with best results to health. And that is what I have a whole video on my YouTube channel going through the scientific research on dried fruit. Now, if it has preservatives in it, like sulfur and these kind of things, it can be negatively impacting. But if it's whole, non-refined, natural, no sugar added, it is actually extremely beneficial to our health. Actually lowers levels of cancer, the research shows. Fascinating. And she told us this. How would she know? How could she have guessed? I've never heard a human say what she said. Not one human, except for the scientific researchers. And nobody shares that information. But she told us, and that's what the science shows. Also, grapes and raisins lower it more, blueberries even more. So what are the ways to balance the gut? Looking at her quote, well, then she says to go back to a simple diet. That can include things like whole grains for those who can eat gluten. That would be, whole wheat bread, oatmeal, and other kinds of well-cooked grains. And by the way, if you have to be gluten-free, if you're one of the 6% of people that struggle with it, just avoid it, no problem. There are about 6% of people that struggle with either gluten or something else, some kind of wheat allergy. So if you're one, just avoid it. My wife is one, I am not. And eat more whole vegetables. Now you can even cook them. It just means not refined. We're not talking about like taking the sugar out of a beet or something like that, but eat the beet, And eat a handful of nuts a day. And you don't need any more than that. And also, unless you're trying to gain weight, that may help you gain weight, but B12 is for those who, if you're totally on a plant-based diet. There are ways actually to get it from plants. I could go into the research. We don't have time. I'm not going to do that now because we're just about to close. But for most people, just taking a supplement here and there is good to go. But I want to close with this today. This is one of the most mind-blowing things I've heard in my entire life, honestly. It's like top 5. This is incredible. So this is a true story of the Victor Valley Medium Community Correctional Facility in Adelanto, California. This is the longest name they could have thought for a prison. And it was started by a Seventh-day Adventist multimillionaire businessman. He got a contract with the CDC, but not the one you're thinking of. It's actually the California Department of Corrections. And he got a contract to start a 500-inmate prison. And they separated the prison literally into 2 sides. And you got to choose when you came to this prison which side you went on. One side would be on a meat-based diet, but he was an Adventist, so they weren't feeding him like pork and stuff, but clean meats on one side. And the other side would go on a plant. They would have to choose between that and going on a New Start program of vegan diet, occupational training, Bible studies, and anger management classes. And by the way, pretty much every prison in America allows Bible studies and has Bible studies, right? So I'm not negating the power of Bible study. It's the most powerful thing that I know of, but that is a common thing in every prison. But so when one of the government workers said, you're going to try to make some of these guys go vegan? No way. These guys would rather burn the place to the ground than go vegan. And they said, well, we'll give them the choice. So they gave them the choice, and guess what percentage of people of their own volition chose to become vegan? Just take a guess. 85% of them chose to go vegan. 85% of these guys, these are like convicts, these are like tough dudes, I can just imagine, they're like, yeah, I'm vegan. You're like, all right, bro, hey, no problem, man. You do whatever you do, man, you're all right, Nobody's gonna make fun of them, right? And what ended up happening? Now, at that time, because this was California, at that time in the state of California, the recidivism rate was 95%. What does that mean? The recidivism rate is when somebody goes into prison, when they let them back out, they're a statistic and they're watched for the rest of their life to see, do they ever go back to prison? And if they do, they are a part of the statistics of recidivism. At that time in California, 95% of people who got out of prison after committing one offense, when they got out, they commit another offense and went back to prison. You follow? Now, while Terry Moreland was running this prison, The recidivism rate from this prison dropped from 95% all the way down to 2%. 2%. This is amazing. So other prisons began to learn about this in the state of California. They began to be interested. And people in the other prisons were like, hey, can I get transferred over there? I want to try this out. And the people in the prison, they were sharing with their girlfriends, their wives, people on the outside. People on the outside were changing their lifestyle. They were being changed. So it was changing those inside of the prison and outside of the prison. And so this was so amazing. People were like, please let me go there. And so you know what the state of California decided to do? They shut down this prison. What? Now, I'm told that prisons are big business. And I know because I've been a businessman, and one of the things in business that is very important to success in business is repeat customers. And imagine if 93% of your customers never came back. Well, that's not a good way to keep a business going, is it? We would have had to maybe shut down 90% of prisons in America. That would have been a dream come true. You can imagine. I interviewed one of the people from this that started this prison with Terry Moreland. His name is Richard Bland, and he shared the story. I have it on film also, interviewing him about this. Now, thinking about this, if God knew that changing people's diets could turn them from a life of crime and delinquent living to becoming good citizens in society, if God knew that, why didn't he just tell us somewhere about that? Guess what? He did. Listen to what Ministry of Healing says. Wrong habits of eating and the use of unhealthful food are in no small degree responsible for the intemperance and what? Crime and wretchedness that curse the world. Do you realize God told us how to fix the ills of society? Meaning these prisoners, they're not guaranteed to go to heaven because they eat right. Yes or no? But they are happier people. They're less likely to go home and beat their girlfriend, beat their wife, commit another crime. They have been changed. Now, they were shared the gospel also, so they were changed both physiologically and spiritually. They were transformed while they were in there. There used to be videos on YouTube. They got taken down. I'm not sure exactly what happened. They got taken down. You could see the videos of that prison, and you could watch these men in there, and they'd say, because normally in prison you have gangs, like you have the black gang, you got the Hispanic gang, you got the Asian gang, you got the white supremacists, and they're all in there in their gangs. And in this prison, they said, you can see in the video, they're like, man, there's none of that here. We're just all praising the Lord together. That's what these people were saying. All that was done. They didn't care about racism and all that junk. They were just brothers in the Lord. God has given us this message, not so you get to go to heaven because you eat right, but it may make your life better here in your preparation for the life to come. One of my favorite things now as a minister of the Lord is seeing people change spiritually to give their life to Jesus, to be baptized, come into the present truth. But also, when I see people, when I see their depression go away, when I see their sleep apnea going away, when I see their diabetes disappearing, when I see these things happen, it is such a blessing to my soul. Because when I began to do this for the first time, I felt like I was truly a part of Jesus' ministry, of preaching the kingdom of God and going forth to heal the sick. And all of us, I'm not a doctor, all of us could do this. Actually, not only all of us could, we are all called to do this. And we're going to teach you more things on how to be a part of that. But I want to challenge you. If you saw something in this message today that you thought would be beneficial, try putting it into practice. I'm not expecting you're all somebody who's, been a meat eater their whole life, they're going to go home tomorrow and they're just going to, just eat fruits and vegetables. No. But if you ate 0 fruits or vegetables yesterday, I would challenge you tomorrow, add 1 to your diet. And in time, add 2 and 3 and 4, and begin to make those positive, progressive changes so that in time you feel the benefit, because I want this church to be the healthiest, happiest church in the state of Tennessee. That's my hope. And my hope also is in 3 John verse 2, Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospers. Let us close with prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Jesus. Thank you for the testimony of Jesus that told us things that we never would have guessed on our own. And as we put these things to the scientific studies, to the peer-reviewed literature, we found out, wow, this little old lady with a third grade education was right, not because she was right, because this is the testimony of Jesus, the creator of heaven and earth. The Creator told us how to live in such a way to be healthier, to be happier. Lord, I pray that you would draw each one of us nearer to you. May we be a part of changing this world so that we leave this world a better place. In the name of Jesus, amen. I want to share you very quickly. So I want to share. So we're going to have fellowship meal. We're late for that. My fault. And then 2:30, roughly, we're going to be back. We're going to have some afternoon activities. Is that right? Am I getting this right? And then at 3:45, roughly 3:45, dopamine and happiness. This is, honestly, this is one of the most important things for young people. I would challenge you. I know nobody wants to bring young people back to church in the afternoon. But I'll tell you what, this could change your young child. They may think, I want nothing to do with this. They will actually enjoy the message, and it could change the whole future of your children, your family, and adults also. And then we'll have a light supper. Then we'll be back for healing the brain and body from depression. And then a final message will be at a health food that may make you depressed, angry, ruin your marriage and children. So